Good afternoon and welcome to our UB Alumni Webinar Wednesday series. On behalf of the UB Alumni Association and the UB School of Management, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's presentation. My name is Christy Fields and I oversee the Alumni Career Services program here at UB. Today I am honored to introduce you to Lorrie Metzger, Clinical Assistant Professor in the UB School of Management's Accounting and Law Department. This webinar will discuss the ways in which data analytics apply to the field of accounting. Lorrie will shed light on how analytics are used to perform testing, to perform recalculations, and to look for unusual patterns in activity that could be indicative of fraud or internal control deficiencies. Additionally, a brief overview will be provided of software utilized to perform data analytics. Lorrie received her MBA from the University of Buffalo and her BS from Rochester Institute of Technology. I am aware that some of you have already submitted some questions, and we will leave some time at the end of today's webinar for Q&A with our presenter. If you have any additional questions during the webinar, please don't hesitate to submit them through the chat question box on your screen. With that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Lorrie Metzger.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about data analytics in the field of accounting, which is data analytics is a very hot topic that's out there and not just in the field of accounting, but more broadly applicable to lots of different industries. So today we have quite a bit to cover on our agenda. First, we're going to define what data analytics is because it's a relatively new trend and a lot of people are in various stages of rolling out data analytics in their various companies and industries. We're going to talk about what it is, what are some drivers behind it, and kind of why are we in the current state that we're in. Type of analytic tests that can be performed, or different categories, I should say, of analytics. Giving you some examples of data analytics that we see across lots of different disciplines and really how they can be applied and at pretty interesting type situations and scenarios. Then we'll talk about data analytics specific to the field of accounting and what ultimately is being done currently, as well as some future applications to data analytics and kind of the proposed future state of where it's headed. Some challenges that we have to performing data analytics, technology. So I have some screenshots of different technologies that we use here on campus in some of the courses. Then we'll turn it over to question and answer. And just to give you a little bit of a brief background, I do teach here in the Accounting and Law Department. I teach some courses that have a touch point to both accounting and technology. And one of the courses I do teach in our Masters of Science in Accounting is a data analytics course, which is pretty new. And really we'll see just because of the shift to moving to data analytics in lots of different disciplines, accounting also being one. So first, to define data analytics, and there's just a couple different definitions I pulled from different sources. So the first one comes from SAS, which is a software provider. Pulled some from English dictionary and some different textbook resources. But some common themes that we see throughout the various definitions. There are large amounts of data. So that is one of the drivers behind this, is that organizations are collecting vast amounts of data. Other theme, there's examination of that data. So trying to figure out exactly what the data means and try to turn it into something useful for the business. Used for supporting decision making. So organizations often want to make decisions and do make decisions on a regular basis, and they're looking for some support to that decision making and driving it from the data. There's logic to it and also statistics. So various different ways in which we can complete and perform data analytics, which I think sometimes makes it challenging because it is so wide open and somewhat unstructured. The drivers that we see behind data analytics include, and at a high level, technological advances in the ability to process vast amounts of data, and increases to computing power and storage capabilities. So to dive into that a little bit deeper, technology advances. We often realize, and I guess maybe we don't realize it, but if we think back to the past even 5 to 10 years, the way in which we transact, the way in which we interact has changed substantially. What we're seeing now is that the vast majority of business transactions, especially consumer to business, are happening via the web. A lot of social interaction, both on a personal note as well as with various companies, is happening on various social platforms. So there's lots of traffic and data that's emerging through those interactions that we're seeing through the internet. Collecting of data from the source. really we are the source, we are the individual consumer, and what businesses are able to do is to collect our patterns, our activity, what we're looking at, what we're viewing, what we're putting in our cart maybe, and then never ultimately make it through to the purchase. So they're able to track so much more. Additionally, we are providing data directly to them when we're doing things like filling out our name, our address, our credit card information when we're going ahead and making those online purchases. Because of that, there's a higher level of accuracy associated with the data. And also, too, there's ability for organizations to ask more of us. I use a very simple example in class with students, and thinking back to how I bought my books when I first went to college. I went to the bookstore and I paid with cash or with a personal check. Now students are going online. They're usually buying them online, you know, Amazon, other booksellers, and they are providing quite a bit of information and quite a bit of data to those providers. So, you know, demographic information, maybe age-related information, and organizations are collecting that much more. Tracking of consumer behavior and buying patterns, so I kind of touched on that already, and they're able to collect more data points for a single transaction. If you even look at something as simple as a receipt, you know, a physical receipt that we receive if you go to a physical store, there's lots of different data points where they're tracking it down to, you know, there's a transaction number, there's a cashier number, there's a register number, so they can really identify the flow of activity and patterns to what's occurring in a, you know, physical location. So lots of different data points. Advances, so they're able to process vast amounts of data much faster, and that's through more advanced algorithms that's able to sort through the data and consolidate it easier. Also, too, we have different approaches to visualizing data, and we'll talk about some of the software options for data visualization that makes it easier to sort of see what's going on and to identify patterns in activity. And then computing power and storage capacity, we see that even on our own personal. If you bought a flash drive recently, you'll notice that you have a greater storage capacity, and it's often at a much reduced price or lower price than you would have paid just even a few years ago. So organizations are seeing the same thing for both processing as well as storage capacity, that they're able to get more for less. So that really incentivizes them to collect data, even if they're not sure what to do with the data yet. Different types of analytics that we see. We have descriptive analytics, predictive, and prescriptive. Descriptive is going to be analytics that is going to focus on what happened in the past using historical data. So I'm going to look at sales transactions for the past year. I'm going to look at maybe payroll-related transactions for a given time period and try to figure out what's going on with that data. Predictive analytics is where I'm using past data to predict future events or to understand how one variable impacts another. So a good example is I'm trying to use past sales to predict future sales if I'm trying to do some type of forecasting. Prescriptive is focusing more on identifying the best course of action given various constraints. So it would be used for more strategic type decisions. So maybe if I'm trying to expand into a new market or offer a new product or something, I want to figure out and use the data to help support me in that decision making to identify what is the best option given XYZ constraints. So instances or some examples of data analytics that we can see across disciplines, which are, some are very interesting. Healthcare. So healthcare is collecting analytics on excuse me, individual patients, and they're trying to figure out, based off of risk factors or you know, unique data points about an individual patient or person, what that could potentially indicate or potentially predict in the future. So for example, you know, your weight, your age, maybe some lifestyle choices if you, you know, are a smoker or partake in alcoholic beverages, those types of things. Those could potentially be indicators or be factors that go into some sort of predictive analytics that you may be more likely to be diagnosed with a certain condition. And they're really trying to figure out and use it to identify risk related to an individual person that may lead to various tests treatments or medications, and they're doing it more, you know, from a cost perspective, and also to kind of, you know, see if there's patterns in activity that could potentially lead to a diagnosis that may have been missed otherwise. So pretty interesting in terms of how they're profiling or creating profiles associated with certain people that have very similar data points about them. Marketing, and we see this commonly where we have suggested items that we, you know, or items that are suggested to us to purchase that may be complementary to the products that we are already purchasing. Amazon is really good at doing this. So they are creating customer profiles based off of certain data points, and they are identifying products that other consumers that fall into your profile have also purchased. So it may be based off of age, it may be based off of buying pattern, geographical location, but they're recommending those complementary products, and they're, you know, suggesting them for you on your checkout page so that you can kind of see, you know, other customers like you have also purchased these other similar type items. So that's a way in which we see data analytics being used very commonly. We also see it related to social media. So you could go to a web page and look at a particular item, and then you go to various social media and you'll notice that that's in your feed. So there is that connection where they're tracking what you're doing, and they're also using it from a marketing perspective. Retail, what we see is that in retail, they're using software to assist in text mining. So social media data is interesting in that it is unstructured data. We see that it's free form. So on the various social media platforms, you can write a sentence, you can write a word, you can do abbreviations, you can do hashtags, you can do all sorts of really, it's somewhat open-ended. Due to that, it becomes difficult for companies to process social media data. So what they end up having to do is to text mine and really look for keywords or key searches that are within certain posts that somebody would do. So that becomes a challenge to organizations, and a lot of organizations that have a heavy presence on social media are you know, working through and to figure out how they turn that into useful data and to help it support any type of decisions that need to be made internally. Service. So one of the interesting, I was at a conference this past year, and there was a gentleman there from Disney, and he talked about their app that they have, which allows them to make the customer pick which options make sense for them. So through their app, you can self-select. You can make dinner reservations. You can get various tickets to different rides and different events that are on campus. You can find where the different characters are surrounding their different parks. Additionally, within the app, they have RFID that's enabled, and they have, I believe, a short range and long range, and it tracks different things. But the whole concept of their app is to make sure that the customer has a very rewarding experience, and in the event that a customer is dissatisfied, they believe that the app and the different data that they're collecting through the app, where you're traveling, what you're doing, if you're making it to your dinner reservation on time, those types of things could lead to satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the customer, and they want to be able to track those various points to make it an overall positive experience for the customer. Now, as it relates to the field of accounting, accounting is still primarily focused in descriptive analytics, which is looking at historical data to describe what's happened in the past. I guess a future state, which we'll get to in a little bit, is also to move into predictive as well as prescriptive, but the majority of where we see data analytics most commonly present is going to be in the descriptive analytics area. So getting into specific, and I tried to pull, I guess, the most common fields or subcategories, if you will, within accounting in the professional world. So I have a touch point to financial auditing, internal auditing, as well as to tax. If we think about financial auditing, ways in which data analytics can be used primarily to perform recalculations associated with financial statement balances. So If you are an auditor, you're often given reports that are system driven. You have to get comfort surrounding those reports, and a good way to do that would be to actually obtain all transactions that relate to that given period, and you're able to go through the process of performing a recalculation if you have the entire population of data. So a great way to get comfort surrounding completeness and accuracy is to go ahead and do the recalculations. Additionally, you can recalculate some things that might be more subject to risk or more subjective in nature, such as any type of allowance or reserve. So, but once again, this is assuming you can get you're able to obtain the entire population of data for a given time period. Related to internal auditing, and this is where I have work experience, so I probably will spend a little more time in this particular field. Internal auditing has quite a few applications related to data analytics. So things that you can do: perform testing on entire populations, identifying unusual patterns of activity that could potentially indicate fraud, or probably more commonly internal control deficiencies. So where we are sort of moving is that we can, through the use of data analytics, we can move to test entire populations versus selecting a sample. So back when I remember when I started working, we would select a sample, and it was often, you know, a set defined quantity. I'm going to pick 15 or 25 or whatever my set quantity was. Now, the chances of finding something might not be that great, especially if we're talking about you know, a significant sample or significant population rather. Now, if I have the ability to perform a test on the entire population, so maybe it's doing a recalculation on an entire population, maybe it's making sure that we have adherence to policy or compliance to some sort of law or regulation. If I can apply it consistently across the entire data set for a particular period of time, or I can gain comfort and greater comfort that I have consistency, common application of internal controls, common application of calculations, those types of things. So a great example, in a prior position that I held, we did a benefits audit, and as part of that we looked at the 401k. And this was, I was working for internal audit for a local organization. And what we wanted to do, we wanted to test some things that were related to the internal policy of the 401k related to eligibility. So there was an age limit. There was also a period of service before you were able to participate. So by obtaining the entire population of all the employees that were well, really, you could obtain the whole employee master file and then really determine from there who would be eligible to participate. We were able to match that up with the employer matching contribution, as well as obtain the employee individual contribution. And through there, we were able also to perform a recalculation of the employer contribution based off of things like salary, what the employee contributed, you know, from the date that they were eligible, were they eligible for the entire year, partial year, and we were able to gain comfort surrounding all employees within this organization. We were able to do this because we obtained all, you know, the employee master file, we obtained payroll related reports, we were able to merge them together, and we were able to run scripts, and back then we used ACL to test for these various requirements of the particular plan. So it allowed us to move from a pretty small sample to the entire population and to gain greater comfort. Also too, you can look for anomalies related to data. Also, you know, any type of internal control deficiency that we see. So if you have some policies, some requirements, mins, max, those types of things, you can look for things that seem to be out of alignment with expectation. From a tax perspective, and this is, I think, a pretty emerging area, analytics using to identify concerns related to tax compliance. So things like looking to see if data can identify any issues related to transfer pricing, related to international tax, any issues related to multi-state tax issues, and also what jurisdictions need taxes to be filed in. So oftentimes, I guess kind of in the past, either accounting professionals or auditors, or I guess whatever your job title is, we often were relying on other people for reports and other people to give us information by which we would go ahead and sort of take it at face value. Really having the ability to obtain the data directly in large amounts of data often allows us to maybe take back some of that control and to kind of really make that assessment for ourselves to figure out if we need to go down the roads, like, you know, where do we need to file taxes and those types of things, so we can get our arms around what's going on inside of the organization better. This semester with my data analytics class, we're partnering with UB's internal audit. Just to give you an example, and this is all in the descriptive analytics space, the 4 different projects that we're working on, we're looking for review of vendor payments for duplicates, which is a pretty common task, and it really is going to be data driven. 2, we're looking for prices paid in accordance with, or hopefully in accordance with, vendor contract pricing, review of travel and expense reports, and then also review of employee master file to vendor master file. So I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. The first one, vendor payments for duplicates. Really why this became kind of a top priority project for my class is that here at UB, and every organization I know has a different structure, but here at UB we have different systems that support different entities. So we have UB, which is part of the state system. We also have the Research Foundation, which is a separate entity, and we also have UB Foundation. UB Foundation is not included in what my class is reviewing, so pretty much just the state and the Research Foundation. We do have the and because of, depending on the source of who's actually paying for different things, so as these vendor invoices come in, depending on, I guess, how they're coded or how somebody gives instructions, they could potentially be paid out of multiple systems. So one of the things we're going to do is to look for duplicate payments, not only just through the state system, but also through the Research Foundation, to see if there's, you know, potentially double billing across systems. Additionally, there is potential for vendors to be in vendor master files more than one time. So what we see commonly, and this is, I think, a common business problem, is that we have a vendor listed as ABC Co, and then another one is ABC Company, and because the invoice may change or the heading on the invoice, somebody was hesitant to assume that they were the same entity, so they created a different one. So that allows for there to be duplicate payments easily as well. Here our processing is heavily relying on manual processes, so due to that it's, you know, more subject to error. We don't have any system application controls that would prevent certain things from going out twice. So that's one of the big projects that my students are working on. The second project looks at prices paid to vendor contract. So as we're part of the SUNY system, we have a decent amount of contracts prices with our various vendors. So, you know, we go through the RFP process. It's a formalized process. Some state institutions or every SUNY school is following the same contract. But a limitation, I guess this is why we're focusing on it, is that there are no specific application controls to prevent or even detect if we're being charged a price that is non-compliant with a contractual price. So we have agreed upon contractual price of $5 per unit. If a vendor invoice comes in at a rate of $5.10, will it get stopped? Chances are no, it would just get entered into the system and it would process through to payment. So due to the fact that it's heavily relying on humans to look up the different contract prices, we're going to look at this as well. And hopefully that, I mean, there most likely will be exceptions to contractual price, but hopefully that will be a potential cost save for UB. Another project that we're working on is travel and expense reports. Same concept. We have multiple systems here for processing payments depending on your funding source. So if I was, I'm not, but if I was a research faculty and I did get some sort of research grant, I could potentially go away to a conference and have it paid out from that funding source through the Research Foundation, versus if I went to a conference and had it paid out through my department. So there is potential for travel and entertainment expense reports should be paid out from multiple funding sources, and those funding sources do not cross-communicate with one another. The fourth one is the employee master file to vendor master file, and that has to do with more of a state law compliance issue, that there should be no employees that are also listed as vendors. So just doing a match based off of address, which can be quite challenging, and I'll talk about that when we get to our challenges later on, but looking to see if there is some overlap between addresses, and then when there is overlap between addresses, trying to sort through and get rid of the false positives. So for example, there may be a person who lives in an apartment building that is mixed residential and commercial use. So it could be completely reasonable that we would see a person in the business being at the same address. So just sorting through those to find out what are true exceptions. Here's just a side-by-side, and I pulled this from a recent ISACA journal, and ISACA is the group that sort of, the professional organization that relates to the world of IT audit. But this is a non-IT audit example. It's more of an internal audit example, sort of a side-by-side comparison where we are now, or where most internal audit shops are now versus future state. So if we look at the current state, oftentimes we see the audit plan is really often driven based off of qualitative factors, gut feel for risk, where do the risks present themselves, where are we getting, what is management concerned about, those types of things. Future state is thought to use analytics to help design that audit plan. So let's look at the data, let's pull from the data, and let the data tell us where the risks are and focus that way. From an audit scope perspective, the audit scope currently is determined before the audit has begun, so we will include XYZ, we're going to leave out ABC, and moving to an analytics state thought to be that the scope could be modified based off of analytics results. And analytics, if it's ongoing and continuous, you're constantly seeing what's going on in your business. So you wouldn't necessarily have to wait until after a test was performed or after data was received, because that flow of data would be constant. Reporting, we often see reporting excludes dashboard reporting, which is more of a visualization way to report, or is very limited within dashboards. So we might see one dashboard report. Future state, moving to dashboard reporting, which allows you to sort of get a high level idea of where your risks and lie in the organization, where the internal audit department should be focusing its efforts. We see generally non-standard testing procedures, so often we're modifying things, we're changing things, we're starting from scratch. Future state develop somewhat standard testing procedures, and that's really, especially if you are doing some level of data analytics procedures and the data source is the same and the format is the same, coming up with some standard scripts that can be repeated time over time, so that you have that continuous flow. So that if we're analyzing some, sales related transactions, we're going to consistently do it from time period to time period, so that we're able to assess, what's going on inside the business. Test procedures involve sampling and often do not utilize data a lot of times, so we tend to still stick to, I'm going to sample 20, 25, 30, something like that. Now we're going to do analytics on large data sets, potentially entire populations. Now I need to, and there's a new desired skill set, now that this analytics has performed on the data, what does it mean? How do I interpret that? How do I turn that into a useful recommendation for my business, so that we can improve and help support decision making, those types of things. Some challenges, and really if we think about it just from the point of getting started. So I'm working in an organization, and first thing I have to figure out is, how do I get my hands on the necessary data? So understanding, and many organizations are using multiple systems to house data, and so it's a matter of finding kind of, I guess first maybe even getting your arms around what data you want, and then figuring out exactly where the data is being housed. So what is available to me, where is it housed, how do I get it myself, do I need to request it, how do I piece it all together? Second challenge is to understand the data. So understanding, and often we see field descriptions that, and hopefully there's documentation maintained that would describe field description. So I have a coding that may be somewhat, a field name that may be somewhat generic in nature, and I'm not sure what it means. It could mean a whole host of things. Having documentation that would describe what each individual field is used for and what data should be housed within it is helpful for you to understand what the data is and what it represents. If you are dealing with multiple data sources, understanding the relationship between data. So if your data starts out in system A and it moves to system B, what is being moved? How does it connected? How can I link the data together? Cleaning data. This is a very, very time-consuming process and very, very challenging. So there are some industry guidelines out there. I think the AICPA has some guidelines in terms of what data format should look like, and how dates should be consistently formatted and how numerical values should be consistently formatted. And so really it's just a matter of I might be getting data from multiple data sources that might be in different formats. So for example, I have a date that's maybe year, 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day. I have another data source that has month, 2 digits, day, 2 digits, and then year, 4 digits. So how do I make sure that my data is consistent across sources? How do I make sure my data is consistent even within the same data source? And that has to do with a lot of the application level controls that an organization may have. For example, are certain fields required? Are certain fields required to be in a certain format? So for example, zip code needs to be all numeric, needs to be 5 digits, that sort of thing. So a lot of this stuff factors in. Cleaning data is very time consuming, but I guess a couple key takeaways: you want to have your format consistent from field to field. You want to make sure that you have adequate fields completed. So if you're looking at an individual record of data, you have a significant portion of it completed. If you have missing data, it could potentially impact your analysis. So all things to sort of think about, and there's unfortunately no one right way to do it. How do I approach my analysis? And that's really, I think, where a lot of times there's the struggle, and businesses are struggling with this as well. I have all of this data, what do I do with it? Analysis in a lot of ways is very unscripted, so the way in which I think about it and the way in which I provide guidance to students is to either come up with risks related to the data set or to start by asking questions that you want answered from the data. So things that you would expect to see, things that you would not expect to see, things you want to know, so you can sort of feel out what's going on with the data set. Merging, if you're getting data from multiple sources, you'd have to figure out what's the key that's connecting your various data sources so that you can consolidate it all together, and what's the best way to go about that. And then drawing observations. So what insights can be obtained from management? And then also too, how do I take those insights and effectively communicate them? So the whole point of performing analysis is to understand, to maybe find areas for improvement, to support decision making. So we need to be able to turn those into words or action items that management can take. So a couple different technologies that we see. We're still using Excel. I think a lot of people are still using, and this is what I'm covering in class. Excel does have quite a bit of capacity to handle a significant amount of rows, and really why we're still using it. Low cost, relatively easy to use. There's a lot of free training out there, so it's easy to understand what's going on. There's also some add-ins. There's an analysis tool pack which allows you to, with the click of a button, perform some things like descriptive analytics. So you see, and I use the consistent file throughout with the different technologies, you'll see there's a data file of travel and entertainment expenses, and then you could see that it to the right hand side, the descriptive analytics that populated through the Excel add-in. So we're still able to do quite a bit. It's somewhat unscripted, but in a way that's really good. Excel has a lot of functions that allow you to clean data, so you can do text to columns, you can sort of separate it out, you can consolidate it, you can format it easily, so there's a lot of benefits to it. And it still seems to be very widely used in industry. Also too, there's another Excel COM add-in called Power Pivot, which allows you to basically create more powerful pivot tables. And I guess the primary difference is you can pull in multiple data files. The data files are pulled in as tables. So what's nice about that is allows you to add data to the source file, and it automatically will update and pull into the pivot table. So if you have data that maybe refreshes on a monthly basis, so you would pull down a new report for a new month, you can, if you did Power Pivot, you could add it to the table, the source table, and it would automatically pull up and pull into your Power Pivot. And it also has the ability to process more records than standard Excel, which is definitely a bonus. So just to give a visual over what it looks like, here we have in the first screen where we are able to pull in multiple worksheets, and we are connecting them by creating a relationship. So that's just where you have that common field that would allow these two to connect. You can see in picture 2 that when data is added to the data model, it's in table format, so it automatically will format it as a table. And then you can see over to the right-hand side that before selecting the various fields for your pivot table, you can see that there's 2 workbooks that it's pulling from. So without using Power Pivot, I guess in the traditional pivot table approach, you would take your data, if you had 2 different sources, you'd have to merge it together before using like a VLOOKUP or index match, and then you could go ahead and insert a pivot table. Here you can have different sources, pull them together through the Power Pivot function, and then get straight to creating a pivot table. Another type of technology that's being used to assist in the field of accounting is computer-assisted audit tools, most commonly ACL or IDEA. Benefits to using the CATs. It has some similarities to Access. So when you're importing data into here we use IDEA. So when we're importing data into IDEA, it imports in as a database. What's nice about that is that it can't delete records, it can't modify records. It's somewhat in a uneditable state. Similar to Excel, I can do lots of calculations. I can add calculated fields. I can do summaries on entire data files. I have some standard formulas that I can apply. So think of a lot of the different functions we see in Excel, and then some that can be applied to the data based off of the different field type that we would have: common, character, numeric, date, or time field. Also too, there is the ability to merge 2 different or multiple databases together by doing a join. A join would be identifying that common field between the 2, so very easy to do that. Analysis can be exported into various file formats, so ease of that. And you cannot, and I already said you cannot edit the original data as imported into IDEA. So you can add to it, you can do analysis, you can do recalculations, you can do summarizations, you can extract records that meet certain criteria. So quite a bit of power behind it. So just an example or visual of IDEA. So using those same 2 files pulled in the employee and expense file, and what you see in the lower left-hand side is the merged file. So very easy for you to do a join and to relate 2 files to one another. To the right-hand side, you see a summarization of expenses by employee name. So very easy to do a summarization based off of different factors that you select. Data visualization software, so some common ones that we see out there in industry: Tableau, ClickView, or Spotfire. This is where we are taking the data and we're turning it into something visual. Graphical format, very easy to create interactive dashboards. Interactive dashboards where you might have multiple graphs in one display. A lot of the software allows you to almost place like filters on the data, and if I'm filtering one graph, then the other graphs will automatically update based off of the selection made. So they're interactive in that if I want to reduce something down by region or product, I can see how all of my charts will update based off of that limitation. We can see the data can be imported from various file formats, so it can pull from various systems. I think there's approximately, and we use Tableau, I think there's approximately 50 different file formats that can be directly imported into Tableau for analysis. really to a benefit is what we're seeing in industry, or I guess really just not in industry, just across, is that most people are visual people, and there are some people, I say accounting people, a lot of times tend to be quant people. We like the numbers, we want to see the numbers, but there's a lot of people that work for businesses that aren't. They want to, you know, the numbers don't make sense to them, or maybe it's overwhelming to them. So if we move into some other type of graphical displays, it's maybe a little bit more obvious. So taking that data set, I just pulled it into Tableau and just did a really quick analysis. It's actually the same thing, the total based off of employee. So you can see, and this is one of the options of chart type, you can see sort of who has the most spend for total expenses per employee. So here, you know, so it's easier to identify, visually identify which employee has the most expenses. Moving on to another graph, this is maybe even more transparent, is to create a bar chart and to sort in descending order, so it's very obvious to see who are our top spends related to employee expenses. So just a different way to approach, I guess, how we're looking at data, how we're analyzing data, how do we sort of make sense of it all. Oftentimes, and especially, you know, Tableau is very user-friendly. It's a click and drag type program, so it allows you to get a feel for, you know, what's going on with the data in a very quick manner. So I think I ended a little early, but Christy, I will turn it over to you to facilitate question and answer. Just wanted to include my contact information there as well. If anybody has a question, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I will do the best to answer.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lorrie, for really taking time to share some great information, share your expertise with us. Really appreciate it. One of the questions that did come through, is there a way just to maybe share some recommendations or just expand maybe on what you touched on already and how the data needs to be prepped prior to analysis?
Okay. That is, I'd say it's a unique challenge for every individual data set that you would get. So what way in which you'd want it to be prepped is to make sure that there's consistency throughout. So for example, if we have certain fields that they are consistent. So I think I already gave the example of a date field. Looking at other fields that maybe are numeric, are they formatted exactly the same? Where data gets a little bit more interesting and maybe more challenging to prep has to do with the format of particular fields. So the one that comes to mind is address. So an address, typically for street address, what we would see is some numerical value and then a street name, and then there may be some, you know, street, boulevard, what have you. In order to really get a feel for the data and to potentially analyze it, especially if you're looking for, like, say, duplicates, or you're looking to see how many instances of a particular situation, a lot of times what you have to do is you have to actually split the data into smaller fields. So for example, you may actually go ahead and split the numerical part of a street address and then split out the street name, and then actually even split out whether it be street, boulevard, court, and so on. And that's because what you may end up finding is in free-form text fields, or maybe things that are extra. For example, additional spaces. It may be that somebody wrote street as a full street, somebody else used an abbreviation. So that's where I think prepping data becomes challenging, and you have to think of all situations and scenarios where there might be a slight change. So that's one where you may actually take your data, and to prep it, you may actually split it apart. Also using other functions that would help you identify if there were things like spaces, because when you're looking and looking for matches, it's going to be a field for field match, and so it's going to, if somebody puts a space, like I put 2 spaces between Lorrie and Metzger, it's not going to hit and find an exact match for Lorrie Metzger with 1 space. So using functions like there's a trim function in Excel which would allow you to get rid of any additional spaces. Sometimes too, data prep also involves making sure that your data is in the same case for text field. So is it all upper, is it all lower, is it mixed? And there are Excel functions. There's an Excel upper function, there's an Excel lower function, there's a proper function which will just capitalize the first letter. So things like that is just making sure you have consistency throughout because it does affect the analysis.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lorrie. We do have a couple additional more specific questions, Lorrie, that I will share with you so you can maybe do some one-off answers with a few of our attendees with these more specific questions. With that said, those are the questions that have come through. Are there any final remarks you would like to leave us before closing?
I think if you're, getting started in the area of data analytics, I guess a couple things to think about is to really focus in on the critical thinking framework by which analytics is sort of, driven off of. Become comfortable with technology, become comfortable and try to learn different skill sets in the various technology that's being used. Technology is constantly evolving and changing, so being very fluid through this process, I think, is definitely helpful.
Great, thank you. So just in closing, on behalf of the UB Alumni Association and the UB School of Management, I really would like to just take this time to thank Lorrie for sharing her knowledge and expertise with us. We have recorded this webinar, and we will send you all the link within the next 24 hours. And as a reminder, Lorrie's contact information is up on the screen if you do want to reach out for any one-on-one questions that you may have that you think of following this webinar. Please save the date for Wednesday, April 12th, as UB alumna Jennifer Cross will present on adaptive organizations. We will share additional details and the registration link in our follow-up communication. And in addition, we do have some other upcoming webinars on the following topics: the Affordable Care Act, what comes after repeal and replace; Sugars 101, all sugars are not created equal; sustainability and the supply chain; UB Libraries is doing an archives showcase. We're going to talk about generations in the workplace, a little bit more on venture debt, and due diligence for business plus Google Ninja tricks. So with that said, again, on behalf of the UB Alumni Association and UB School of Management, thank you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.